Have you ever noticed how things start to shift when you stop settling and begin honoring your worth? Quietly, without making a scene? That's the heart of today's message. When you value yourself, you only attract the best. It's not about being perfect or loud. It's about changing the energy you carry, the choices you make, and the boundaries you set. When you truly value yourself, your world begins to reflect that. Not overnight, but certainly and steadily. This isn't something you hear once and forget. It's the kind of truth that needs to settle into your bones. So let this be a video you come back to, maybe in the morning before your day begins, or late at night when things feel quiet. Let it remind you of who you are and what you deserve. If at any moment this message speaks to you, feel free to subscribe, not because I ask you to, but because somewhere inside, you know you need more moments like this. And when you're ready, just drop a comment below. This is what I needed today. Sometimes that one simple sentence can open a new chapter. Not just for you, but for someone reading it too. 1. You can't love yourself without knowing who you are. We often hear the phrase, love yourself, but few pause to ask what that really means. For many, it turns into a surface-level routine. Spa days, positive affirmations, or walking away from anything that feels uncomfortable. But true self-love doesn't begin with indulgence. It begins with clarity. You can't love what you don't know. And if you haven't taken the time to understand who you are beneath the noise, the masks, and the roles you play, then every attempt at loving yourself will feel like pouring water into a cracked vessel. Real self-worth isn't built through motivational quotes. It's born out of quiet, honest self-inquiry. Who am I when no one's watching? What values do I actually live by, not just talk about? These questions are not always easy, but they're necessary. I once had a friend who checked all the boxes of success: a six-figure income, a beautiful house, and a lifestyle others admired. But he often said he felt empty. I don't know why, he told me once. Maybe this is just adulthood. But one day, that changed. After months of reflection and a sudden health scare that made everything feel fragile, he asked himself a simple but radical question. Am I living a life I chose, or one that was chosen for me by the world around me? That question cracked something open. Slowly, he started walking away from the roles that no longer fit. The job stayed, but the mask began to fall. He no longer needed to prove himself through titles. He began making decisions not out of fear or image, but out of alignment. That, right there, is what valuing yourself looks like. It's not loud, it's not always dramatic. It's quiet, clear, and steady, like a river that no longer needs to fight the current because it's finally flowing in the right direction. To know yourself is to return to yourself. And when you do, you realize you're not empty. You were just filling your life with things that didn't match who you truly are. You can't love a house if you've never walked through its rooms. Maybe there's beauty in the corners you haven't visited yet, dreams you once abandoned, beliefs you borrowed but never questioned, emotions you labeled as too much and locked away. Valuing yourself means unlocking those doors without shame. It's the beginning of real emotional healing. And when you begin this journey inward, you don't just feel better, you attract better. The people who come into your life stop being drawn to your performance, and instead, they connect to your presence. The opportunities that arrive feel aligned, not forced. The work you do feels less like survival and more like purpose. This is the essence of personal transformation. Not becoming someone new, but stripping away everything that is not truly you. Even Stoic thinkers understood this. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." If your thoughts are fogged by roles you never questioned, your soul will dim to match them. But when your thoughts are clear, rooted in who you are and not who you pretend to be, then your soul and life reflect that clarity. And here's the truth. Until you return to yourself, every act of self-love is just decoration. The core must come first. From that core, a different kind of energy is born. One that no longer begs, performs, or proves. One that simply stands, and because of that, draws in what is real. So take the time. Sit with the quiet, ask the hard questions, and then revisit this message often. Let it guide you back when the world pulls you off center. Practice it every day, not just by thinking, but by choosing. And if it speaks to something inside you today, maybe share it with someone you care about. Sometimes a conversation that starts in you can echo into someone else's awakening. 2. The unconscious never waits. It runs your life silently. Most of us believe we're making conscious choices in who we love, what we pursue, how we react, but much of the time, those decisions are quietly driven by something we don't see. Carl Jung called it the unconscious, not a passive storage of memories, but a living system that silently shapes the patterns we keep repeating. The unconscious never sleeps, never waits for permission. It operates like a background app, directing our behavior through emotional memory and learned beliefs we haven't yet questioned. That's why some decisions you call intuition may actually be old emotional echoes. A person may keep choosing emotionally unavailable partners, not because of fate or type, but because their nervous system has come to associate love with distance, silence, or struggle. I once knew someone who dated men who made her feel invisible. Over and over again, she told me, "I don't know why I keep ending up with people who don't see me." But when we talked about her childhood, the picture became clear. She grew up with a father who was present in body, but absent in affection. And her unconscious, like a radio locked on a certain frequency, kept tuning in to what was familiar, not what was good, but what was known. It's easy to call it bad luck or to blame external circumstances, but Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And fate in this case becomes nothing more than emotional repetition disguised as destiny. Imagine an old vinyl record playing the same loop because of a scratch. It sounds normal at first, even comforting, until you realize it's not playing the whole song. That's what unprocessed emotional patterns do. They trap us in loops that feel natural but limit our growth. And until we examine the beliefs beneath them, we keep dancing to the same melody. This is why emotional healing must begin with awareness. You have to notice what feels familiar, and ask if familiar always means healthy. The moment you pause and observe a reaction instead of automatically acting it out, you create space. In that space, you begin to rewrite the script. This awareness is not just psychological, it's energetic. As you begin to uncover the roots of your unconscious behaviors, the energy you carry shifts, your internal broadcast changes. People who once matched your old patterns may begin to fall away. Opportunities that once felt unreachable now feel strangely aligned. That's not a coincidence. It's personal transformation in motion. The world doesn't just respond to what you say you want, it responds to the energy you emit. And when your unconscious is cluttered with unresolved hurt or internalized beliefs like "I'm not enough," that becomes the frequency you send out. But the moment you begin clearing that signal through reflection, journaling, therapy, or silence, a different life starts to respond. The Stoics also believed in mastering the unseen. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And mastery begins with awareness. When you understand what governs your emotional responses, you stop blaming, stop repeating, and start choosing. You begin to shift from survival to sovereignty, from reacting to creating, from attracting pain to inviting peace. This work is not about blame, it's about understanding. It's not about perfection, it's about pattern recognition. And when you begin to make the unconscious conscious, you change the entire tone of your life. Not by forcing it, but by tuning it. So come back to this. Listen again. Let it remind you that just because something feels natural doesn't mean it's true. Sometimes what feels like you is just an old version of you that was never given a chance to grow. And when you honor that truth, a quieter kind of healing begins. One that doesn't shout, but speaks in new choices, better relationships, and the quiet peace of not repeating the past. 3. The shadow is not evil. It's the part you haven't accepted. There's a quiet part of ourselves we often avoid, not because it's dangerous, but because it's uncomfortable. It carries the jealousy we're ashamed to admit, the anger we suppress to keep the peace, the insecurities we cover with performance. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the collection of traits, desires, emotions, and memories we've rejected because they don't fit the version of ourselves we think others will accept. But hiding something doesn't make it disappear. It makes it stronger, denser, and eventually more destructive. The shadow, left unseen, finds its way out in moments you can't explain. The sudden overreaction, the bitterness you can't shake, the cold silence you give someone you love. These aren't signs that you're broken. They're signs that something inside you is fighting to be seen. I remember watching a gentle colleague, someone always calm, always kind, snap during a meeting over a minor critique. His outburst surprised everyone, but no one more than himself. Later he told me, "I don't know where that came from." But I did. It came from a shadow he'd worked hard to keep hidden, a part of him that had swallowed years of pressure, unspoken resentment, and the need to be perfect. Eventually, the container cracked, and what emerged wasn't irrational, it was real, and it had waited a long time to speak. We often assume emotions like anger, envy, or fear are signs of weakness, but in truth, they're messengers. They carry information we haven't yet processed. Suppressing them doesn't make us stronger. It just makes the eruption inevitable. Like a glass of water with silt at the bottom, it may look clear until life stirs the glass. Then the murkiness rises, not because it suddenly appeared, but because it was always there. True emotional healing isn't about getting rid of your darkness. It's about learning how to hold it with honesty and without shame. When you acknowledge your shadow, not to justify it, but to understand it, you begin to access a deeper self-worth. You stop needing to prove you're good. You stop pretending you're never afraid. And in that quiet courage, you become whole. The Stoics never shied away from discomfort. In fact, they believed facing discomfort was essential to virtue. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." And there's nothing braver than looking at the parts of yourself you were taught to hide and saying, "You belong too." Because until you do, you will always live with a split inside. One part performing. The other part is waiting to be welcomed home. The world responds not to who you pretend to be, but to the energy of who you really are. If you carry shame, it shows in your decisions, who you let in, what you tolerate, how far you believe you can go. But when you own your shadow, something powerful shifts. You no longer react to protect a false image. You respond with clarity. You no longer need to control how others see you because you've already accepted the parts they might judge. This acceptance isn't weakness, it's self-awareness. And from that awareness, a different life begins. Relationships become richer. Boundaries feel natural. You attract people who aren't afraid of your full range because you're no longer afraid of it yourself. So when we say value yourself, it must include every part of you, not just the polished, presentable ones. The shadow is not evil. It is simply the truth you haven't yet made peace with. And when you do, you don't become someone else. You become fully yourself. That's when life responds differently, not because the world has changed, but because you have. Quietly, steadily, and without shame. 4. Letting go is a radical act of self-love. Letting go is often misunderstood. We tend to see it as giving up or walking away. But in truth, letting go is one of the most courageous, soul-affirming choices a person can make. It's not failure, it's clarity. You don't let go because you're weak. You let go because you finally realize that what once served you is now silently holding you back. We often stay in situations, relationships, or even identities long after they've stopped nourishing us, not because they're right, but because they once meant something. That job you've held for years, the one that pays well but leaves you empty. That relationship you know in your heart is over, but the memories are too soft to walk away from. That version of yourself that others admire even though it no longer feels real. We cling, not because it's love, but because it's familiar. And familiarity, while comforting, can also become a trap. A close friend of mine once stayed in a job for 9 years. It wasn't terrible, no abuse, no dramatic breakdowns, just a slow erosion of joy, of spark. "I can't leave," he told me. "If I'm not doing this, I don't know who I am." But eventually he realized he wasn't living, he was performing. And when he finally let go, something unexpected happened. He didn't lose himself. He found someone he hadn't met in years. Someone curious, alive, quietly bold. That's the paradox. What we fear will break us is often the doorway to who we're meant to become. Letting go is not about discarding everything. It's about honoring what was while making space for what wants to emerge. It's like a boat anchored too long in one harbor. The waves still crash, The wind still calls, but nothing moves unless you lift the anchor. Carl Jung called this process individuation, becoming who you truly are, beyond roles and attachments. And letting go is essential to that journey, because as long as you cling to what no longer mirrors your essence, you're stuck in someone else's idea of you. You stop evolving. You stop attracting what's meant for you. You send out a signal of fear, and life, sensitive as it is, responds accordingly. But the moment you let go, not in bitterness but in truth, your energy changes. That shift is not loud, but it's real. Suddenly, people who reflect your growth begin to show up. Work that aligns with your deeper purpose begins to appear. And most of all, your own presence begins to feel lighter, more grounded, more whole. The Stoics taught the same principle in a different way. They urged us to focus only on what we can control and to release attachment to outcomes. Epictetus said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control." Letting go, then, is not surrender. It is choosing freedom. Freedom from roles that shrink you, expectations that exhaust you, and patterns that no longer feel like home. You don't need to explain it. You just need to trust it. The most powerful act of self-worth is when you say, "This no longer fits, and I love myself enough to release it." That one choice rewrites your entire vibration. And when that happens, you no longer attract the same kind of people or circumstances, because you're no longer the same. So, if something in your life feels heavy, misaligned, or lifeless, maybe it's not your fault. Maybe it's just time. Time to lift the anchor. Time to say goodbye, not with regret, but with reverence. And as you do, remember this: letting go is not losing. It's making room for what's already waiting for you, just beyond what you thought you needed. 5. Synchronicity only comes when you're authentic. There's a strange kind of magic that begins to unfold when you stop pretending, when you no longer shapeshift to please others or chase what was never meant for you. Carl Jung called it synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that seem to arrive out of nowhere, connecting moments, people, and decisions in ways logic can't explain. But this synchronicity is not random. It doesn't respond to control or effort. It responds to truth. When you begin to live in alignment with who you really are, not who you were taught to be, life starts to reflect that clarity back to you. You meet someone unexpectedly who answers a question you hadn't even asked out loud. You hear a sentence in a conversation that shifts your perspective entirely. You open a book and it tells you exactly what you needed to hear that day. These aren't just accidents, they're signals, affirmations from the deeper flow of life that say you're on the right path. But you don't get there by forcing outcomes. You get there by letting go of the performance, by choosing authenticity over approval. It's like music. When you're playing your own melody, even quietly, the universe finds ways to harmonize with you. You don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to be in tune. I remember once stepping into a bookstore I'd never been to, drawn by nothing more than a quiet nudge. I had started making space in my life, cutting out the noise, slowing down, choosing stillness over busyness. And in that bookstore, I met someone who would later become a pivotal part of a project I didn't even know I would create. That moment wasn't planned, but it didn't feel random either. It felt like synchronicity, not because I was chasing something, but because I was finally available for what was meant for me. When you live out of alignment, constantly compromising, shrinking, or pretending, your energy becomes cloudy. You might still be moving, still achieving, but nothing quite fits. You wonder why things feel stuck, why the relationships don't last, and why the work feels empty. It's because the signal you're sending is distorted. But the moment you return to your essence, something subtle but powerful begins to shift. You stop pushing. You start attracting, not through manipulation, but through resonance. The world begins to meet you where you truly are, not where you pretend to be. Even Stoic thought echoes this truth. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." If you think in fear, you attract what confirms it. But if your thoughts, words, and actions begin to reflect your authentic self, the part of you that doesn't need applause to feel enough, then synchronicity begins to appear not as luck, but as alignment. The job offer that comes just after you finally walk away from the toxic one. The old friend who calls on the day you almost gave up. These things happen not because you planned them, but because your inner life has become spacious enough to receive them. You don't need to advertise your worth. When you truly live it, life takes notice. Synchronicity is not about being rewarded. It's about being ready. Ready to see, ready to receive, ready to trust, and most of all, ready to stop running from who you are. So the next time something small but meaningful crosses your path, a phrase, a song, a stranger's words, don't dismiss it. Pause. Pay attention. Because maybe it's not just a coincidence. Maybe it's life nodding back at you saying, this is what happens when you finally stop hiding. 6. You are the frequency you broadcast. We live in a world that tells us to act, speak, and affirm in order to attract what we want. But more often than not, it isn't what you say that shapes your reality, it's what you emit. Beneath your words, your habits, and your goals lies an invisible current, your frequency. And it's this frequency that life listens to most. If deep down you believe you're not worthy, not interesting, not lovable, no amount of external effort can override that inner signal. The world responds to what's rooted, not what's rehearsed. It's why some people walk into a room without saying a word and instantly feel trustworthy, while others, even with charm and polished speech, somehow leave you feeling unsure. That difference isn't charisma, it's energy, and you are broadcasting yours all the time, whether you mean to or not. You've likely felt it before. You've met someone whose quiet presence brought calm even when they said very little. And then there are those whose anxious energy seems to pull chaos toward them, even as they insist they have it all under control. This isn't about magic or mysticism. It's about alignment. When your inner beliefs contradict your outer behavior, people can feel the dissonance, even if they don't know how to name it. And more importantly, life feels it. Like a radio tower set to a certain frequency, you'll only tune into what matches your current state. If you're broadcasting fear, insecurity, or desperation, you'll keep encountering experiences that affirm those emotions. But when your signal shifts, when your self-worth becomes solid, not in words, but in quiet self-regard, everything begins to reorganize around that change. Carl Jung alluded to this through the idea of archetypes and the collective unconscious. When you carry a wounded archetype, the rejected child, the forgotten dreamer, the constant giver, your actions and choices unconsciously follow that story. You live inside that frequency, even if you claim otherwise. But the moment you rewrite your internal narrative, the moment you say, I no longer believe I have to earn love, or I no longer choose silence over truth, your frequency changes. Not overnight, but steadily, undeniably. And what meets you in the world begins to reflect that shift. There's something powerful about not needing to prove anything anymore. When your worth is stable, your energy becomes grounded. You stop chasing, you stop explaining, you stop performing. And in that stillness, in that quiet confidence, the right people, the right opportunities, the right timing begin to find you. Not because you manipulated the outcome, but because you finally matched the signal required for it to appear. Stoic wisdom mirrors this beautifully. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." And thoughts, especially the ones you don't speak, are what build your inner atmosphere, the energy you send out with every step, every silence, every choice. So the real question is not, how do I attract better things? But, what am I silently telling the world about who I believe I am? Because that's the frequency that sets everything in motion. You don't need to be loud, you don't need to be seen, you only need to be true. From that truth, resonance takes over. And resonance, unlike effort, always brings back what matches your core. When you value yourself deeply, not for show, but with quiet, steady intention, the world does too. Not because it's watching, but because it's listening. And it always hears the frequency you didn't know you were sending. The greatest privilege is to be your true self. There is a moment, sometimes it comes early, sometimes late, when you realize the summit you have been climbing is not, in fact, your mountain. Up to that point, life feels like a relentless audition. Wearing the right smile, echoing the right opinions, chasing applause that never lands quite close enough to fill the quiet inside. We are trained to believe success is the sound of other people clapping, that love is the sensation of being chosen, that peace is compliance. Yet each of those markers is borrowed and brittle. The deepest form of self-worth psychology begins the instant you stop performing for a seat in someone else's theater and decide the only audience that matters already lives inside your ribs. I once spoke with a retired engineer who spent 4 decades chasing titles. He admitted, with a half-laugh that carried both relief and regret, "Not until 62 did I retire the costume other people handed me." The next words were softer, almost a confession. That's when life finally started. His story is an emotional healing journey many postpone, an unconscious mind pattern that tells us belonging requires shrinking. Yet the signs you don't value yourself are subtle. Agreeing when you mean no, apologizing for your joy, curving your shoulders so your light seems smaller. The day you reverse those habits is the day personal transformation tips from theory to practice. It feels like shedding a suit 2 sizes too tight. Suddenly, oxygen reaches the corners of your lungs you forgot existed, and with that first full breath, your authentic frequency travels farther than any carefully scripted bio ever could. From there, our spiritual self-awareness grows quietly, like dawn. You notice you no longer chase better relationships, you attract them. Opportunities arrive without the taste of desperation because the signal you send is clean, steady, unmistakable. Carl Jung might say the shadow work is paying off. Each disowned trait reintegrated, each inner healing process accepted without judgment, so the self can stand whole and unmasked. And in that wholeness, you discover a counterintuitive truth. The people meant for you do not require you to dazzle them. They simply recognize you, the way a key recognizes its lock. The privilege then is not comfort or certainty, it is the freedom of occupying your own skin without negotiation. Like stepping out of fluorescent light into honest morning sun, flaws and all, you realize perfection was never the point. Clarity was. And clarity has gravity. It filters noise, invites resonance, and quietly refuses anything misaligned. So success shifts from a scoreboard to a pulse. Am I aligned with what matters to me? Do my choices match my convictions? If yes, applause becomes optional. If no, applause becomes irrelevant. That is the quiet revolution of choosing yourself. It is not loud, yet it rearranges everything. How you spend your hours, whom you let near, what you will no longer tolerate. The world may or may not celebrate that shift, but the right pieces will move toward it, drawn to the authenticity they were waiting for. And that, in the end, is why valuing yourself attracts the best. Not because you have become flawless, but because you have become real. And reality, unlike approval, never needs to be chased. When you truly value yourself, everything begins to change. Not because the world suddenly becomes kinder, but because your energy shifts. You stop chasing what was never meant for you and begin to attract people, opportunities, and experiences that resonate with your truth. From shadow work to emotional healing, from releasing limiting beliefs to living from your authentic self, the journey is never easy, but it is always worth it. Self-worth is not built through surface affirmations, but through inner clarity, spiritual self-awareness, and consistent personal transformation. So if any part of this video spoke to you, take a moment to reflect. What frequency am I broadcasting? What do I need to let go of? And more importantly, who am I becoming? Share your story in the comments below. You never know who it might help. And if you found this message meaningful, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more insights that truly matter.